Hi, my name's Bree, and today I am going to be talking about something that is probably going to piss a lot of people off. I've been a member of the booktube community for a while now. I watch a lot of reviews. Some of them are just hate reviews. Some of them are positive. As I have entered my cozy girl era, booktube has sort of been this haven for me, and I've always loved reading. And it has been nice to connect with people that enjoy that as well. It's been an interesting experience. It has also led me to realize that booktube has some problem, and maybe I should not say booktube specifically. Certain people within the literary commentary community. Before I go any further, I need to give you some background about myself so that people understand where I'm coming from when I tell you that if you think Colleen Hoover books should be banned because of problematic love interest, you're wrong. I have a master's degree in ABA therapy. I've spent the last, ABA therapy. It's more of applied behavioral analysis, but I've spent the last 10 years working in behavioral therapy, so I know a little bit about human behavior. Am I an expert? No, I am not. But what I have heard in terms of critiques of books with toxic, problematic love interests and why those books should not be allowed, specifically in the romance genre, I think the intention is right? Because people are trying to solve a very valid problem in society. Being in relationships with people that are toxic, that are harmful, and allowing their behavior, condoning their behavior, romanticizing the behavior is a valid, widespread problem in society. But trying to solve that problem by banning books is a little wild, or saying that the problem is caused by books like Colleen Hoover's. It's pretty wild, and I am not a fan of Colleen Hoover's work. I have not read a single book by her. I've only watched commentary reviews because, personally, her love interests don't appeal to me either, from what I've heard. I am not the type of person that likes to read literature with love interests that behave like that, but do I believe that the book should be banned because of that? No. And I'm going to explain to you why from the perspective of someone with a good amount of experience in human behavior. Okay, let me pull up my notes here. I do have ADHD, so I have a tendency to be all over the place. So I will be referring to notes throughout the course of this, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so within the realm of Colleen Hoover hate videos, which are just widespread, and I'm using Colleen Hoover as an example because she's the number one author that I think most people think of when they think about the romance genre and problematic love interests that are portrayed in a light that romanticizes the problematic behavior. A lot of people, I hear the objection that, like, oh, this is very harmful to young women, right? And this gives them a negative portrayal of what a healthy relationship is. This romanticizes or excuses bad behavior, and this is going to go on to lead them to think that this behavior is okay. And I understand that perspective, right? I get why people have that concern. But I want to make a point here. So if we use that argument, that is similar to people who say that teenagers, kids, or even adults should not be allowed to play violent video games, as in video games with guns, video games with shooting, because that leads to violence, right? Just because you consume, and often in these video games, that violence is portrayed as something that's cool and desirable, right? Like, that is something that's portrayed in a positive light. But that does not mean that just because it's portrayed in that light that people are then going to go on to do that in the real world. They've done studies on this and shown that there is no link between the two. It is the same for romance books. You know, I think there's this expectation in the literary community, specifically the community that critiques books, that like the love interest needs to be these good, perfect people, or at the very least that they should not have behaviors that can be harmful to the person they're dating. And I think one of the main problems that I have with that is when you look at something like, for example, Disney movies, which Disney has its own issues, but with Disney movies where you have the prince and he's, you know, this perfect gentleman, and he's handsome, and he's kind, and he's thoughtful, and he will go to the ends of the earth to save the princess. That's what we show children when they're younger, right? It's simple, it's straightforward. But it also lacks it's not realistic, right? Because realistically, people are complex. People don't exist in a bubble. People have contradictory traits sometimes. It's very rare that someone is going to be all good and not have at least one or two things about them that it's going to be bad. I say bad, but one or two things that they could work on. And I think that if we were to live in a world where all of our romance books were focused on love interests that don't have that only have positive traits, that would do as much, if not more, harm to young women, because what it would do would be to communicate, this is what a good guy looks like, right? Or a good partner looks like. And if they are handsome, if they're kind, if they're thoughtful, if they're charming, then they must be a good person, because that's what we see in the movies. That's what we have in the books. And I think what that could potentially lead to on the flip side is young women going out and dating and thinking to themselves, oh, well, if they're A, B, C, and D, then they must be a good person, and ignoring these other things. Or not realizing that just because someone presents that way for 6 months, that doesn't mean that's who they are. It takes years to get to know someone sometimes. Going from my own experience, I was like a late bloomer. I did not start dating till I was 18. And when I did, the person that I dated had a lot of toxic traits. But at the time, he was kind and he was thoughtful and he was funny. And he gave me all of his attention, and he made me feel special. And because of those things, and because I was 18 with no dating experience, no context, I thought, oh, well, that's who he is. All those good things are who he is. And these other things are just things that he struggles with. And that's just not the reality. The reality is that people don't exist in a bubble. People are bad and people are good. Human personality is complex and it's nuanced. Someone can be a good person, but also do bad things. And I think it's important to teach young people this so that they understand that someone can make you feel special. They can make you feel seen. They can make you feel wanted. They can make you feel so many amazing things and still not be good for you. You can love someone and still say, for all the good things that they have, but still say, hey, you do this one thing that is so harmful to me or to our relationship that I can't be with you. We need to have nuance in this conversation because that's reality. In the field of behaviorism, we don't teach people that the way to modify behavior or the way to address behavior that could be harmful or problematic, the answer to that is not to insulate people, as in the case of the suggestion that these books just shouldn't exist. That's not the answer, because these people exist, right? So you can take around the books, but there are always going to be harmful people. The answer is to instead teach young women and young men, young people in general, that like how to identify the fact that someone can be all these good things but also still not be good for you. Someone can make you feel all these things but still also be a bad person. That's a nuanced conversation that needs to be had, and that is not going to occur if we just take the romance genre and say, okay, we only need love interests without any of these negative traits. Hang on, I'm gonna refer to my notes here. Similarly, I recently dated someone who had all the positive traits that you would expect for someone in a romance book to have. And he ended up being not a good guy. Very soft-spoken, appeared to be very kind, very thoughtful, was the first one to talk about women's rights and say like how much he supported women. Come to find out that the reality of it was a little different, and he may have been very soft-spoken and gentle and all these other things, but half of the things coming out of his mouth was a lie. And he's the only boyfriend I've ever had gaslight me. So take that for what you will. A couple books I want to point to as far as where they have... Actually, no, I'll save this later. So far I've talked about essentially how this is a nuanced conversation, right? Nobody's all good, nobody's all bad, and our books should not reflect that, because then we're giving young people a inaccurate impression of how people are, right? How humans are. Now, I think that intention behind a book is also important. Not every book is a moral lesson, and I think that conversation needs to be had as well. Not every book is about learning the type of person that you should date. A lot of books are fantasy fulfillment, or they're about exploring these more taboo concepts. And we need to have space for this, because not every book should be a moral lesson. Sometimes books are meant to make you think about something. Sometimes they may not. That may not be the author's intention, but they do that. They can accomplish many things, and I feel like that's very important. For example, if someone is interested in BDSM and they're interested in like non-consensual fantasy, non-consensual roleplay, they should have the space to explore that in a book. That shouldn't be something that's policed by other people. And another thing that I want to touch on really quick is, I've never read Lolita. I've heard of it. I do want to take a moment to talk about how books that have problematic love interests are in a completely different space than books that, for example, talk about portraying young children in that way. I feel like that is absolutely problematic. It should not be allowed in the literary space. I think it's different if it is a book that's sort of... I've never read Lolita, I've only heard of it, but if it is similar to like American Psycho, right, where it's more of a commentary on the someone being depraved, essentially, but the problem there, I think, is that there are certain things in a society that are just not okay. And granted, like, when you have a love interest that is mean or cheats or does other things that are emotionally abusive, that's not okay either, right? But the book is not, like a book like Colleen Hoover's is not promoting that. A book like Colleen Hoover's is perhaps portraying that in a light that is romanticized or excuses the behavior. But from the perspective, from what I've heard, mainly from the perspective of the woman, right? She is an adult. She's in a consenting relationship. And people all the time choose to be in relationships with other people that are not great. And we have to respect that. We can't tell people this isn't good for you, so you're not allowed to do that. They have the right to self-autonomy. That is different than books like that feature sort of portraying children in a certain light, because those are just inherently predatory. And those are normally not targeted towards the same audience as women who read Colleen Hoover books. The reasons why people read Colleen Hoover books are completely different than why people read those other books. I feel like I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I did just want to make that clear, because I don't think those books are okay. Like I said, if it's like an American Psycho, which I have not read, I've only heard of, it's on my list to read, but if it's like that, where it's really sort of exploring, it's more of a commentary on the human condition, and giving the reader a glimpse into the mind of a psychopath. That's very different, versus if it's something that's glamorizing inherently criminal, predatory behavior. Two different things. Like I said, the conversation is very nuanced, and I feel like it needs to be very nuanced. There are a couple books that I want to talk about that people tend to sort of point to as like, this book is wrong, you should read it. Besides Colleen Hoover, because like I said, Colleen Hoover is not my jam. It probably sounds like I'm defending her, but I'm not. I don't read her books for a reason. It's because that sort of love interest does not appeal to me. But I think there's a space for it. I know people who like it, and I think good for you. Those people are in healthy relationships outside of that. And I think that if you are someone who has done a lot of commentary on Colleen Hoover books and wants to promote healthy relationships and help women to know what that looks like, most women and most people in general learn what a healthy relationship is by seeing that modeled in the home, or seeing that modeled as they're growing up. And not all of us, unfortunately, have access to that, myself included. I saw unhealthy relationships, which was why I struggled in my first few relationships. But Twilight, for example, where people now people feel a certain way. Twilight was not the reason why I tolerated abusive behavior in my first relationship. The reason was I did not have enough experience. I did not have enough examples in my own life modeled to me in the home or with people I was close to, and I did not have enough experience to know what was okay and what was not. We live in a society where misogyny is inherent in the messages that we send to people. We have this saying, boys will be boys, right? That excuses this sort of behavior, but we internalize that, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I think that is the real problem. I think books are just that. They're just books. They're just simulations. And I think that if you have someone who reads a book and thinks that book is a model of what a healthy relationship should be like, I think there are bigger problems. I think that person needs the answer. If you have someone who reads a book about a toxic love interest and then tolerates abuse in their relationship because they are using the book as an example for how to live life, is not to ban the book. The answer is to help the individual to develop critical thinking skills, to differentiate, and to give them examples and models and reason for why that is and is not okay. Because that book is a very, very small, that's a that's a blip on the radar of all the things that person is going to go on to come into contact with, that send these messages that may or may not be harmful in terms of behavior they should and shouldn't accept. And the solution is not to create an insular bubble through which an individual exists. It's to give them the tools to decide for themselves and understand what is and is not okay. So the few books that I wanted to sort of talk about that I have seen a lot of people criticizing because of problematic love interest, because of unethical sort of things that take place throughout the book. Captive Prince. I enjoyed Captive Prince, not as a romance, but as a sort of dystopian book. There are a lot of people who said that it was just, what's the word? There were people who said that one of the biggest problems in the book was slavery and the way that slavery is portrayed. And I did have a problem with that. I did. I'm half black for context. So half my family is black, half my family is white. I did think that it was problematic in terms of, I'm not even going to go into it, for different reasons. I think that having slavery in a book is not a problem in and of itself. Let me start there. People need to be able to differentiate between something that they read, something that they play, right? Between reality and non-reality. And if they can't, that is what needs to be addressed, not changing everything else that exists in the world that could potentially influence the person. And in Captive Prince, just based on my sort of perspective, you have it was a while ago since I read this book. You have the main character, Laurent. I can't remember the other character, the prince that becomes a slave. And Laurent is one of the most morally gray characters. And you come to find out that he has his own trauma. But my point is, when I read that book, I was in my early 20s. I never once read that book and was like, this book is promoting slavery. Not once. I never once read that book and said this book thinks that this behavior is okay. But the book is never about changing slavery in that world. The book is about the relationship between the two people and all of the sort of political backstabbing and stuff that is going on. Just because something immoral exists in a book does not mean that it shouldn't exist there. We need to, so books in part are great because they make people think about things that they've never thought about before, right? And sometimes these things aren't always comfortable. We need to be able to have things in a book that may make people uncomfortable or that may be immoral, because that is reflective of the world that we live in. And that's going to create, that's going to start conversations about it. That's going to make people think about it. How do we make people think about these areas that are morally gray or these issues that are problematic without featuring them in books? If that is the whole purpose of the book, is to start a conversation. So yeah, like I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, it's just like like a book about kink and slavery. It is not. I enjoyed the book when I read it. I would not call it a romance at all, to be clear. But I do think that it was fascinating if you look at it from a dark fantasy sort of perspective. Like I said, not every book is a moral lesson. I don't think that one was a moral lesson about slavery. If you would like some books on that, I can refer you to quite a few of them, but that's not going to be it. You know, like if there are spaces for these conversations to take place, and sometimes I do think that people are looking in the wrong places. Another book, Axios, I believe it's Axios, where it's a book about two men. They're both gladiators. One is forced to be a gladiator. One chooses to enter the gladiator school because of his father's like like being disgraced or something. Like I said, been a while since I've read these books. My taste in romance has changed throughout the years. But in that book, there's a scene where the main love interest kills a slave that the MC was sort of like making eyes at. And he justifies it and pretty much says, oh, he was a slave, he didn't matter. I think that was what he suggests, or at the very least, he says he was a slave, he's beneath us, right? That I had a problem with. Because here's why, because it was never addressed by the main character. It was like, oh, like, okay, so you promote slavery, that's not whatever. That's cool, there's no problems with that. I had a problem with it as a reader personally. I don't think that means the book should be banned, because guess what? There are people out there like that who believe these things, people that I've met. It's not like I read Axios and I was like, yeah, it's fine if somebody's like pro-slavery, like, because their relationship, this book was so beautiful and it made me change my stance on that. And like, no. There are plenty of books, and the book itself, I didn't feel like, I had issues with the book itself because of the lead, for reasons that go to my own personal taste. But my point is, like, he was highly flawed, and he was meant to be a highly flawed character, and that was reflected in some of his beliefs. I don't think that's a problem. And like I said, if people can't tell the difference, then there needs to be support for that. The answer is not to ban the book. The answer is to help the person. I think I had one more book. Cut and Run. Cut and Run was very popular in the male romance genre. Are you noticing a theme? Ty, I think his name was Ty. So problematic. Like, he's misogynistic, he's rude, he's very insensitive to, I think the other main character's name is Zane, and his struggle with alcoholism, very insensitive. And there was at least one dubcon scene, I believe, in there. so yeah, but I loved the book. I thought it was great. Now, would I ever go on to say, hey, like that? I would not want to date either of those men, right? Like, you can read about something and be like, this book was great, this was like, and enjoy it, but also like have enough discernment to say, like, in the real life, that wouldn't work. That'd be abusive. That'd be problematic. Oh, hang on. Sorry, my boss was calling me. Anyways, yeah, so I think that this is a very nuanced conversation. I think there are many reasons why people who want to, people who want to ban Colleen Hoover because of problematic love interests, they're on one end of the spectrum, like a very extreme end. And at the other extreme are the people who want to ban books that talk about slavery, that talk about why certain other things are problematic, which is currently taking place in certain parts of the world. This is a nuanced conversation, and people need to be able to realize that just because they don't like something, just because something makes them feel uncomfortable, doesn't mean it should be banned. Both ends of the spectrum have the same problem, ironically. And like I said, toxic relationships, highly problematic, legitimately an issue in today's society. For men, for women, for non-binary people, for any... Alright, sorry, work stuff. Managing stuff that is time sensitive. So, long story short, I like my fair share of problematic love interests as well. I think our current society still has a lot of problems as it relates to sexism, as it relates to homophobia, as it relates to many biases that exist and continue to be a systemic part of the world that we live in. However, I think that it is important that we approach these issues with nuance and that we work on solving them in a way that is actually effective and does not make the very groups that we're trying to help feel judged, right? Or feel like they are being treated unfairly, which a lot of people who love these books, if they were to be banned, that's how they would feel. Behaviorism teaches that the problem is not the individual, the problem is the environment, right? Because our environment shapes our behavior. And you may say, well, hey, doesn't that mean that we should ban these books? No. No, that is not what that means. We don't teach in behaviorism that the solution is to so let's say I'm working with two people and one person hits the other person, right? And let's say that I would not look at that and say, okay, you know what we should do? We should make sure that this person that is hitting this other person does not have access to any violent video games, doesn't have any sort of violence or hitting in the literature that they read, in the books that they read, as that they don't come into contact with that sort of behavior and then model it. That would not be how I would solve that. What I would do in that situation is to say, okay, well, what is the function of this behavior? Why are they doing this? And how can I teach this individual to access whatever reinforcement? I'm using terms that are not going to make sense unless you've studied this, because there are misconceptions around what these words mean. Let me reframe. I would say, why is this individual doing this, and how can I teach them more adaptive behaviors that help them to access the same function? So let's say one person is hitting the other for attention, right? I would teach the person to tap on their shoulder or to say, excuse me, so that because that behavior is serving a function. And to say that we should just ignore the function is to say that we should ignore the feelings, emotions, and needs of that person, which is not the solution, and is going to be highly ineffective. When we have people that are entering unhealthy relationships, specifically young people, as a young person who entered a unhealthy relationship myself, and tolerate behavior that, it's not that we don't know it's harmful, right? It's that society has told us men will be men. Society has told some women, specifically in certain spaces, it is your duty as a woman to put up with this behavior. And for me, one of the things that I struggled with was low self-esteem. And I felt like, at certain times I had to tolerate this behavior or I would have to be alone. The solution to that is not to say, okay, well, make sure that this person does not read Twilight. The solution to that is to look at, well, what need is being in this relationship filling for this person? And how do I help them to meet that need without this behavior? Part of that is going to be building self-esteem, right? Part of that is going to be the parents vetting the men in their child's life, which that's a whole different conversation. But also making sure that young people are around other people that are still meeting their emotional needs, that are still meeting their need to feel loved and to feel desired and to feel seen, that are good people, which that is very tricky, right? Because we cannot control the friend groups or the social groups of young people. But if you have them involved in certain activities that are more likely to attract people that share their beliefs and also believe that treating other people with respect and kindness is important, that's going to increase that likelihood, right? So those are all environmental things that are going to be much more effective at addressing the core root of this problem than banning books. So I hope that makes a lot of sense. You know, we live in a world where people are very lonely, like we have incels, but young people in general, they live their lives on social media. But you can only get so much connection through a screen, as I sit here and make this video, right? But it's true. You can only get so much connection through a screen. And I think that as young people in general, we tend to tolerate more. And as we get older, as we experience certain things, we realize that it's not worth it. Right. You know, this will be my last tangent, and then I promise I'll be done. For anybody interested in analyzing human behavior and making commentary on that, what I would suggest is that you take this sort of final point. The way to correct human behavior is not to restrict it. The way to encourage ethical, moral behavior and healthy relationship dynamics is not to prevent the individual access to certain things, whether it's in the form of what you consider toxic, problematic romance literature, whether it's in the form of violent video games, whether it's in the form of all the TV shows where we see, you know, these crazy volatile relationships. Because your child is going to encounter that in the real world, or your teenager or young adults, whether you want them to or not. You are not always going to be able to vet that. It is much more of a service to these populations that are more vulnerable to these things, to teach them and give them the skill sets to deal with these problems for themselves, right? Because they're not always going to have you with them. You know, allow those those toxic books to be out there, like Colleen Hoover, but also provide them with examples of healthy relationships, right? Show them why this is okay in the realm of for fantasy fulfillment, or in the realm of just you know, fiction, but this is not okay in real life, and this is why, and this is how you tell what is and isn't okay. Encourage self-esteem building, encourage interactions with social groups that meet these needs that these people have. There are so many other ways to tackle this issue that are valid. Okay, I think I'm going on at this point, but I hope that makes sense. I hope that I have made my point, because this is a huge pet peeve for me. I watch so many brilliant people who make commentary on books, who make commentary on movies and TV, and I hear this argument over and over again. And as someone, like I said, who has spent the last 10 years in the field of human behavior and has a master's degree in it, I'm telling you guys, that is not the answer. Because these things are out there, and we have tools to help people. It starts with understanding. You know, and it's going to vary by person to person. Not everybody stays in a toxic relationship for the same reason. So understanding and empathy are so important in solving this problem. Don't demonize it. Don't say, oh, it's because you were you know, like, especially since a lot of times the things that we read and consume and hold near and dear to our hearts resonate with us on a personal level. You don't want that person to feel attacked. So please approach this with care, approach this with a true understanding of what's going on and what's going to help the person. Bye.